Hi, welcome to SQL Recovery demonstration for the Unitrends System Administration course. In this how-to video tutorial, we're going to take a look at creating SQL recovery jobs. We're going to perform a restore to the same SQL Server asset from differential and transaction log backups, and we're also going to restore to a different SQL Server asset from a full backup. Once again, it's going to start in your environment on your local source appliance in most cases. But once again, your first question you have to ask yourself is, how far back do I need to go? Is this a local recovery I'm doing from my newest recovery point, or am I going back to cold storage, or am I going off the hot target? You may even have to log into your hot target and make sure you have SQL assets registered to your hot target. All right, here we are working off of our local source appliance. Once again, anytime you log in to your appliances, you want to make sure you're checking for any outstanding alerts up here at the top and make sure you've addressed any outstanding errors before you start. Also, make sure you check your job queue. Make sure you're not running any backups against the same asset, whether it's file and folder level backups, virtual snapshots, or application-based asset jobs against those same databases you're getting ready to restore. You also may want to take a look at your job manager. Right, in this case, we're dealing with our SQL server, so we have a couple of SQL database backup schedules here. You can see one's going to start here at 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm getting ready to test SQL. I'm not sure if I want transaction logs to run at 10 o'clock in the morning, so I may want to disable that for a little bit through my restores here, just for a few minutes. I can re-enable that when I'm done and run a manual transaction log or backups right after this process as well, too. All right. So now I'm ready to start showing you here once again that, anytime you go to start recovering stuff, you want to make sure maybe in your protection summary first that you have valid backups for the asset you're looking for. Here we're looking for backups on our SQL server. So if I first filter on the asset name, you can see all the SQL assets for that particular agent-based asset here. Okay. Now, once again, you can also filter on the true over here, and that'll narrow it down to the assets that you have backups for in the last 7 days. Remember, this is going back 7 days, back to March 12th for our date today, March 18th. Now, these assets, by having this true in here, means that you at least have a recovery point. All right, now, down in the backup section, you can filter, once again, in the same manner. And now you see your assets that you have backups for, and you can see the backup types that you have in the last 7 days, and the number of backups, warnings, and failures, and the last backup. Right now, this schedule is disabled, so you don't see it part of any schedule currently. When I go back to re-enable that, the schedule that this is a part of would show back up in there. Okay. Once again, you can't do any recovery from here, but you can at least verify that you have good backups for the asset that you're about to recover. Right? In our case here, we're going to mess with these 4 databases: customers, sales, accounts payable, and accounts receivable. All right. When you look at a quick visual summary, once again, you can drop down into your SQL assets. You do have to go to the instances themselves, and then here you'll see the summaries of the databases you are backing up. Once again, we're not running backups against these SharePoint objects back here through SQL, so those won't have any protection summary. They won't have any details in here. Okay. You can also, once again, filter. In my case here, I've named all my databases ending in main DB here, so it's real easy for me to filter on those database names, those asset names. All right. Once again, you could filter over here. I don't have 100% successes in there. You could go through each of these days. You can see on Monday here, I had 8 warnings, right? On Tuesday, I had 4 and 4. On Wednesday, I had 1 and 7. And then on Thursday, yesterday, all backups were good. Starting out so far this morning, I've got 1 successful transaction at 8 o'clock this morning across all these databases too. Kind of a good little summary. I've also been replicating without issues the last 7 days as well. All right, once again, no recovery from here. Just a quick way to kind of validate that, yes, I'm going to go to maybe one of these recovery points from these days, and they're all green, right, before you start digging into the recovery tab. All right, because remember, when you start to do any recovery, no matter what type of asset it is, physical, virtual, file, folder level, NAS, SQL Exchange, SharePoint, Oracle, that list goes on. Okay. you start here in the Recovery tab under the Backup Catalog. Right? Remember, over here to the right, you can filter, once again, on that asset name. So if you've named all your databases somewhat similar, now that you know how the filtering works, I'm not telling you to go name your databases based on our filtering, but knowing how you can filter, you might find some commonalities in your database structure and your naming. All right, so a lot of easy ways to get your assets filtered in here so you can see maybe all of them. Or, once again, if you are looking for a certain database, you can filter on that database name. There's one particular database there by itself. Now remember, this is set to go only 7 days here, so we're going to go back a little bit farther. If I go all the way back to March 1st, you'll see that I actually have backups for this asset going all the way back to March 3rd. Here's my original full transactions and differentials every day since almost. You can see that entire history. All right, now, once again, we're going to be showing you a couple of different recoveries here for these databases. And before I do any kind of restore for SQL, I like to go to my SQL server and kind of open up your SQL Studio so you can see these recoveries happening on the back end. When you look at your database list here, we're going to clone some of these databases and we'll see them show up. Unitrends restores your SQL databases in recovery mode. They're automatically going to mount and start and put that database online and attach it to your instance and everything. If you don't change the name of a database going back to the same server, same instance, it will overwrite it up to that point. So be careful. That's why we're going to show you some of this stuff. All right, so the first recovery we're going to do, and you don't have to open up your SQL Studio once again. This is just visual on the back end, just so we can watch this process happening on the back end over here, seeing these databases being restored. Okay, so we'll go ahead and minimize that for now, or just leave it right there. All right. Now, the first recovery we're going to do is going to the same SQL server, and you can do that from a full backup, right? You can do that from a transaction and differential too, and you can also do it from a full, right? But I want to show you here in a full backup, right? I just want to show you this first, that from a full backup, once again. So what you'll notice in here is when you get into the setup of this job, I have 2 registered SQL assets, right? And if I pick a new asset, I pick a new instance, I can rename this database or leave it the same name, all right, from a full backup. Now, when you go to a different server, different instance, it makes you type in this path, right? It makes you type in a new path. Or you can browse out through the machine and go to your production SQL directory if you want to put it right out there, okay? Now, we're going to come back and show you this when we're all done here. No, let me go ahead and submit this job to the RDR server. Now, I'm not running the SQL Studio over there. I'm going to show you how this database can be seen in the Satori interface after the restore is completed. But here you can see a nice little summary screen where I can see the database name, the server it's going to go to, the instance, and the storage it's going to go to. All right, when I submit this job, because it is a full backup, once again, in the job queue, you're only going to see one active job for this restore. All right, you only see one active job for this restore. All right, you'll see later on when I submit differentials and transaction logs, it's the number of recovery points up to that point. Each one is its own job. All right, we showed you that in the SQL backup presentation piece. All right, this job won't take very long. We'll go ahead and let that one run. I'm going to go back to the Recovery tab, and once again here I'm going to filter on my main DBs. And this time we'll take the accounts receivable, right? We're going to take the newest differential, and I like this filter over here once again because if I know I'm looking just for differentials, I can filter those right out. Maybe I'm looking for my newest differential last night. And if I want to take this recovery point, you'll notice in here for the differentials now, I can't change that to the RDR server 2. All right, I can't change that to the RDR server 2. All right, but I can go to the same server, same instance, and if I do not rename this, it will overwrite. If you want to do a clone and a test of a recovery point, make sure you rename this. It can go back by default to the same SQL working directory, or you can specify that temporary path. Maybe you don't want it to go into production storage. You want to go somewhere temporary so you can see it and delete it much easier later on. All right, now you'll notice once again this nice summary screen, setting up your details. Verify that you've renamed it. Very important to make sure you verify the rename of this server if you're going to do a test or audit. If it's DR mode and you're putting this thing back, don't rename it. Just let it all go back to default. All right, we're going to go ahead and save this recovery job. Now, once again, this is a differential. So the first thing you're going to notice different in the queue is that there's 2 jobs now queued up. The first one that's going to go active is the full. The second one that's going to be pending on the first task is then your differential backup. All right, so it has to restore the full first and then the differential. And what you'll notice in here is once this thing goes active, here you can see the active job, it's reaching out to the client. Then you can kind of go over to your studio and you can start to refresh this and you'll start to see the restore happening in here. It's starting to send data to this SQL instance. All right? Once both of these restores are done, once they're both completed, you'll then notice over in your SQL Studio that this database, once again, is up and running. It's been recovered in recovery mode. All right? You don't have to go and attach it and make it online or do anything to it. It's going to be up and running when it's all done with the last restore. So once this disappears off the background here, I should be able to refresh this again and see that running database. All right, so there it dropped off my list. I can refresh one more time, and I see that accounts receivable main differential has been cloned over. It's a test. All right. That same exact table structure is up to date from last night's point in time of a differential. It's been cloned. All right. You want to make sure that you delete that database when you're done with your recovery point, whatever your tests are. You can go ahead and delete that database out of that inventory. Whoops. And then you'll also want to make sure if your storage is tight, once again, out here on the C drive where we restored this, you can see that database is out here as well too. If I wanted to go and reattach this, I could. Actually, no, I can't. I deleted the whole thing. But you want to make sure you kind of delete this directory to make sure you get any other residual files out of there if you need to. Okay, it does delete the database files when you delete it from the studio. All right, the next recovery we're going to do is once again over in our backup catalog. We're going to filter on our main DBs once again. And this time I'm just going to grab the next database I see. I'm going to grab a customer's main DB, and we're going to pretend that accounting came to us today, and they said, Tom, we realized that yesterday we were entering the 10045 forms wrong. We got a bunch of bad data in there. It'd be easier if we went back to yesterday, or yesterday at noon, or 11, I think we started to enter the data, whatever they tell you, whatever time they tell you. Now, the secret to transactional log recovery is that they may come to you right now and say, hey, like an hour ago, the database was fine, but now something's wrong, or we've been, a user issue or whatever the issue pops up. We need to go back to like an hour ago. But if you go to your database recovery point right now, it's 8 o'clock. Right? It's almost 10 o'clock now, and if they tell me, hey, I want to go back to 9 o'clock this morning, then your best bet is to actually run one more transactional level backup across these assets. So I would recommend if they come to me right now and says, hey, Tom, I need to go back to 9 o'clock, but I don't have a 10 o'clock transactional backup, then I would go ahead and run a new transactional backup against these databases right now. I would go ahead to the next screen over here. I'd say, run me now a transactional backup against those databases. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and kick this job off because I'm going to show you here. It didn't like that at all, did it? Let's just do this. Let's go to our job here. Right? Let's go to our job manager. This schedule is disabled. Let's just go ahead and enable it. It's the same thing as running it. It might not have let me kick that off because that schedule is disabled. Right? And those assets are part of that schedule. right? Because now that I've enabled that schedule, it did kick off those backups. What you'll notice in here is that the backups that I have restored so far, it is forcing a new full from the schedule. Remember that after a successful restore of an asset or an object, and this works for VMware, Hyper-V, SQL Exchange, Oracle, SharePoint, they all do this. After you restore an object, the next scheduled backup will promote itself to a full. Okay, they all do this. Okay, that's why these two are running fulls based on the schedule. Right? Now it will prompt an alert up here that says, hey, these two assets have been promoted to a full based on a recovery that you did. It does tell you that in the alerts. We'll see that later on maybe in the ongoing admin. All right. All right, now these recoveries, we're going to wait on these for just a few minutes. We'll let those all finish up. Once again, we do have a hot copy job configured for these assets, so these should turn around and start to create backup copies over to the hot target for us here in a few minutes as well too. We'll see those jobs start to go through as well. Okay, so now that my queue is all cleared out, I don't have any more jobs that are going to run here. Once again, this transactional backup, it's not going to run until 12 o'clock. And then against my file level asset for my SQL server, that thing's not scheduled to run until like 3 o'clock in the morning tonight across the file level. And then that SQL asset's also a part of the VMware 24-hour here. That's not set to run until 9 o'clock. So I don't have to worry about any of their jobs running against this asset. Now, once again, if they come to you and they say, hey, Tom, we need to take that customer's database back to 9 o'clock this morning, right? We need to take that database back. You'll go to your recovery points in here, and you'll see that new transaction point that you just ran, right? That corruption might be after 9 o'clock. The user issues might be after 9 o'clock. They want you to go to as close to 9 o'clock as possible to put that database back. So you'll use this recovery point, and when you get in here, you'll notice that when you put a transaction level backup back, you have to go back to the same server and the same instance. You can't change it. Now you could leave this default name here, and it will overwrite your existing database. We talked about that. If you're going to do a test or an audit in here, make sure you rename this thing. You might put a date back here, or test, or audit. Just put anything back there. Okay. You'll notice once again from a transaction going back to the same server, same instance, right? You'll see here that you can leave it default or you can specify a path. Remember in that full that we put back, we could change it to any location. The differential, it had to go back to the same server, same path, right? And when we did that full and we went to the RDR server, it forced us to type in the path. There is no default in there. You have to tell the database going to a different server where it goes. So if you have to rewind it and go back and see that again, check out the difference here where it doesn't force you to go to a different location. Maybe I'll show you another full and we'll show you that again too. Now, in here, when you look at setting the point in time, once again, if they come to you and they say that they want this to go to as close to 9 o'clock as possible without going over, you can scale this bar to set it as close to 9 o'clock without going over it, as close to that objective they tell you. All right. Once again, pre and post commands if you need them, and a great summary page to help you verify whether you're in DR mode or you're doing an audit. Do not overwrite a production database. Don't be that guy or girl that does it on an accident trying to test something. When you submit this job, what you're going to notice that's different, once again, we talked about this in the presentation, is in your job queue, you're going to see in this case 4 jobs. The first job that starts is going to be the full, putting the full back. The second one is the differential from last night. And then I have 2 recovery points from this morning. The 8 o'clock transaction is going to go all the way back. And then the 10 o'clock transaction is going to restore up to the point in time that you put it to. All right, so we'll see these jobs kicking off. There's the first full. The next job, once again, will be the differential. Then the transactional restores will happen. Once again, as these restores start and they hit your server here, you can go to your studio on the back end once again, and you can refresh these, and you'll see that restore happening. If it's DR mode and you don't change the name, you'll see it overwriting your existing database. It will happen. Make sure you pay attention to that name when you are doing an audit or a test. It's huge. Once again, when this last job is done, this database will be attached and online and running. We restore once again in what's called recovery mode. When the last job hits, we'll come back and refresh that. Okay. Now, while that job is restoring, we're going to go back to our recovery queue real quick. We're going to take the same sales log that we put to the RDR server. We're going to take that same database. We've got a new full from this morning. We're going to recover that full, this time to the same server. You'll notice if I go once again to the RDR to a different path, I have to type it. And if I go to the SQL SharePoint 2, I can leave it default or type it. All right, big difference right there. All right, make sure you choose your instance. Now this one we're going to do to the same server. All right, I am going to rename it. I am going to put it to a temporary path again. This one I'm going to call SQL 3. There is no point in time from a full. It's going to restore to the full point in time. Pre and post if you need them. Check your summary. Make sure you rename. We'll go ahead and submit this job. Once again, it's a full, so you're only going to see the one job hit your queue. When this job is done over in your studio, you'll see that database has been restored as well too. All right, so now we've put back the T logs here. We've got another full coming back. Let's go ahead and do one more differential for you really quickly. Let's go ahead and filter on our differential backup types for the main DBs. Let's take our accounts payable, newest differential, recover it. Once again, same server, same instance. I'm going to rename this diff, and I am going to specify a path in here. We'll put it to SQL temp 1. As long as they're unique, doesn't matter. I don't have a temp 1 out there. Once again, no point in time. I don't have to worry about pre and post here. Summary tab, make sure you check all your details. We're overriding to new storage, same server, same instance. Once again, this differential in your queue, you're going to see 2 jobs being restored in here, the full and the differential. Once those are done, those are going to be seen over in your studio once again. So now over here, I have a T logs that I've audited, a full that I've audited, and we've got a differential running right now. Okay, we're going to go ahead and let that run, and we'll show you kind of what happens after the fact after you do some restores. We're going to show you a couple more cool things. Okay, we can see our queue is cleared up here now. What I want to show you, is a couple of different things. Once again, we've done some restores. So now if you wait, an hour and this refreshes, you'll see your recovery summary go up. Right? You can also refresh this button and it'll force it to go up as well. So now we've done 79 restores. I've done a bunch of other ones as well too in my testing before I recorded the session, but now I can see that number went drastically up. Now, each recovery point counts as its own restore. So what I want to show you in here is when you now filter on your SQL server, it looks like a bunch of restores, but once again, this is the transactional recovery I did here. All 4 of those recovery points count as a restore. So it's kind of misleading how it kind of goes up. Even though you might have put back 1 asset to 1 recovery point, it counts each of those recovery points through that backup group as a restore. So just keep that in mind. Here's the differentials. You can sort this by the end time maybe to make sure they're in the right groups. So you can start to see those patterns of what types of backups you're doing or what types of restores you're doing. Now, the other cool thing I want to show you, and it applies to Exchange, SQL, VMware, Hyper-V. It's called the auto include. Remember when you create backup jobs, right? When you create backup jobs in here, we have the ability to mark these schedules auto include, right? And we've done that down here. Now, we just restored some new databases out here to SQL, right? If we refresh again now, we have a differential, a transaction log, and a full, right? We have all three of those new databases out here. So what you'll notice is that if you edit this schedule and you look at it, it doesn't pull those new assets in right away if you just come in here, right? What you have to do is either wait until the schedule kicks off at 10 o'clock tonight, and it will do a discovery on itself at that time and pick up any new databases, right? Or you can just manually kick off the schedule right now and see if it picks up the new databases in this auto include full. So here you can see two of the new databases got picked up in there, the T-logs and the differential. The full recovery, for some reason, didn't get picked up in this new schedule. That setting is very dangerous on the other hand, and this is why I want to show you this, because imagine even in the virtual environment or SQL, these databases can get pretty large. The virtual machines can get pretty large. So, you might not want an auto-include schedule across a SQL instance or a VM instance like Hyper-V or VMware when you put a lot of test machines back or do audits and maybe leave them in there for long periods of time, days. If it's overnight and you run 24-hour periods, you're going to get a full across that asset that maybe you never intended to back up. When you do that, it runs the risk of affecting your retention. Right? So the auto-include option, as cool as it is, to make sure it does pick up new databases when someone does put one on production and they forget to tell you, it's great. But if you do a lot of auditing and testing and restoring stuff, leaving it there for a couple of days, the auto-include, it gets you in trouble. It can affect your retention. So be careful with that auto-include setting. Okay. Now, once again, you can also run the restore reports manually yourself. Go back to, whatever history you want. Maybe you're going to do an audit and see how many SQL restores you've done this month. So you can go down the list. You can see I've done 92 SQL restores in the last month. And if you look at the end time going all the way back to March 9th, I've done a bunch of SQL restores. Pretty cool. So I think that's a pretty good overview for you for SQL recovery.